Hello, I'm Anoop, also known as Ancient Bananas. So you might know me from my multi-instrument video game music covers, but today I'm going to talk about a very different part of my life. So 1 year ago, I became a vegan, and I just want to share my experiences. In this video, I'll explain why I'm vegan, how I got here, and the benefits and the challenges that it brought to my life. And don't worry, this video isn't about trying to tell you that you should be vegan. That's a decision that you can make for yourself, but maybe you'll find that my experiences help you make that decision. Before I get started though, I want to start with a couple of content warnings. First of all, this video is going to discuss philosophy and specifically moral philosophy. So you might want to consider how you feel when you are around that type of discussion. And also, I will be discussing animal cruelty in broad terms for throughout the video. And in one small part of this video, I'll be discussing specific practices of animal cruelty. And I'll give you the timestamps to skip that if you want. All right, let's get started by defining some terminology. So, what is vegan? Well, I actually use the word vegan in 4 different ways. So let's go through them one by one. Vegan food is food that doesn't contain animal products. And what's an animal product then? An animal product is any material derived from the body of an animal. And this can include meat, and that's stuff like, chicken, pork, beef, whatever. And also dairy products, which is stuff derived from the breast milk of mammals. And that includes just what we normally call milk, and also yogurt and cheese and butter. And there's also various other types of animal products, eggs, one of the most common ones. And there's also gelatin and honey. But there's also animal products that are not food. So these can include things like leather, wool, and silk. So yeah, anything that is not specifically animal products is vegan food. So vegan food is actually a pretty wide categorization, which I didn't quite put that together early on. And, it includes everything from like fruits, vegetables, nuts, oils, seeds, salt, and sugars. Vegetarian food, I'll also mention, is any food that doesn't contain specifically meat, but it can include other animal products. So that's vegan food. A vegan diet is a diet that consists entirely of vegan food. Vegan philosophy, also known as veganism, is the philosophy that it is immoral to consume animal products because of the harm that it does to animals. Now, there is a commonly cited definition from the Vegan Society, although that's, I found, not really what I mean when I say veganism. So this is the definition that we're going to go with for this video. And the primary reason that I am vegan is because of vegan philosophy. And that brings me to what is a vegan person. So there's actually 2 definitions of a vegan person. One of them is a person who follows a vegan diet, and another is a person who subscribes to vegan philosophy. And of course, there's like a huge amount of overlap between these two. If you follow the philosophy that it's immoral to consume animal products, you're probably not going to consume any, and therefore you have a vegan diet. And so you're vegan by both definitions. I personally am vegan by both definitions. So yeah, me being vegan by philosophy does mean that, in my opinion, it is immoral to consume animal products. And the reason for that is that, in reality, animal products are produced by inflicting a great deal of suffering and abuse onto animals. And this is something that I am against. So I decided that in order to truly oppose animal cruelty, I needed to switch to a vegan diet so that I wouldn't be supporting these cruel industries. This is my primary reason for switching my diet, but it's not the only reason. Some other great reasons are for the environment, and that's because animal agriculture is actually pretty bad for the environment. It requires a lot of land and deforestation to grow all the crops that you need to then feed the animals, which are then killed just to feed us. Not to mention, of course, that the animals themselves also release a ton of greenhouse gases. And the last reason that I'm vegan is for my health. And I'm not that much of an expert on health, but I do believe that the vegan diet is healthier for me than a non-vegan diet would be. So these are the reasons that I've been a vegan for the past year. But what about for the other 26 years of my life before that? Well, during that time, I ate animal products actually pretty enthusiastically. So I ate chicken, beef, pork, milk, cheese, yogurt, and eggs. And yeah, I didn't really think about it too much. I even remember thinking that it would actually suck if I got lactose intolerance because I felt like I could never give up cheese. All of my family and most of my friends were meat eaters, and I had some vegetarian friends and no vegan friends. So I kind of saw eating meat as a cultural norm. I wasn't really often encouraged to think of the moral implications of eating meat, so I didn't. I did, however, have some sort of instinctual bad feeling when thinking about usages of animal products that weren't so much of a cultural norm. For example, animal products eaten in other cultures, such as like brains or like even dogs, and also animal products used in contexts that I didn't grow up with or that I newly learned of. For example, some harps and classical guitars can come with gut strings, which are made from the intestines of animals. So whenever I felt that instinctual bad feeling, I probably mischaracterized that feeling as personal disgust. So that's a feeling that I decided to just set aside. But in retrospect, I think what I was actually feeling was an empathy for animals. And the reason that I didn't feel that when I was eating chicken and beef and stuff was because they were such a cultural norm and so common, that empathy was suppressed. Very rarely, though, I would hear or read something that would actually activate my empathy for even these animals. And in those cases, I guess what I would usually do is tell myself some kind of half-baked argument to justify my continued harming of these animals. I'll discuss some of these arguments later on in the video. And I think what I was feeling was cognitive dissonance, and that would be from the conflict between my sense of morality and my actions. And this cognitive dissonance made me not really want to think too deeply, and as a result come up with these sorts of half-baked arguments. So this continued until last year when I went vegan in November. But in October, there were actually a few events that I suppose prepared me to take veganism seriously. One of which was one of my friends actually invited me to a vegan restaurant, and I didn't think that I would enjoy it, but I decided to go anyway, and when I did, it actually was pretty good. Another thing I was doing around that time was buying a harp. So I was doing all the research on what options to get for the harp, and one option that you can get for the strings is gut strings, which are made from intestines of animals. So even though I wasn't a vegan, this still made me a little uncomfortable, but I decided to still try it out because, they told me that gut strings sound warmer than nylon strings. I tried it out, but I didn't really feel like it was significantly better, so I decided to go with the nylon strings. I think a concern for animal welfare did partially motivate my decision. The third thing that happened in October was that I discovered Alex O'Connor's channel on YouTube. And he talks about various philosophical topics like the existence of God, the nature of morality, and sometimes some specific moral issues like should marijuana be legalized or should the UK monarchy exist? And this is the type of discussion that I really enjoy, so I got interested in his channel. I did see that some of the videos on his channel were about veganism, but I think my cognitive dissonance made me want to avoid thinking about that issue, so I ignored those videos for a bit. But after watching a few videos, I realized that Alex is really good at presenting arguments well, and I do have a principle of hearing out opposing arguments, even if I disagree, as long as they're well presented. So I did ultimately decide to hear out the argument for veganism. And so on November 10th of last year, I watched 2 videos about veganism on Alex O'Connor's channel, and they were very eye-opening. And it was important for me because it was the first time that I really thought about animal cruelty seriously. specifically in the context of how my actions of eating animal products cause animal cruelty. Of course, I didn't go vegan on the spot, but I did for the next several days watch more videos on veganism, some of which were on Alex O'Connor's channel and some of which were on Earthling Ed's channel. Watching these videos allowed me to finally acknowledge a few things about who I am, understand how flimsy some of my past excuses for eating animals were, and I learned several things about animal agriculture that I just did not know until that point, including the rampant cruelty not just in the meat industry but also in the dairy and egg industries. So there were three main things that I learned about myself by watching these videos. First of all, I am in fact against animal cruelty, and I don't have an exception for just because the animal is a chicken, a cow, or a pig. And I don't have an exception for just because the animal is on a farm. And I certainly don't have an exception for animals that experience cruelty on my behalf. Secondly, my choice to eat animals is pretty much entirely motivated by pure taste. There's no external factors forcing me to eat meat or other animal products or anything like that. Third, my opposition to animal cruelty runs far deeper than my taste for animal products, as much as I did like animal products. And so I had to conclude that my completely optional actions of eating animals were causing animal cruelty on a large scale, all to fulfill my relatively trivial desires to have like a bacon cheeseburger one day or fried chicken another day. I didn't even have a good sense of how good vegan food tasted. Even so, it did feel a bit extreme to just stop eating animal products. So I had some counter-arguments in my head for why, even though all of this is the case, it's still okay to eat animal products. And evidently these counter-arguments are made often enough by non-vegans that the videos I was watching did mention them and point out the weaknesses in those arguments. So I'm going to share some of those counter-arguments and why they're not strong enough to keep me eating animals. Argument 1, eating animals is natural. So first of all, yes, it is true that animals in the wild do kill and eat other animals, and that is a part of nature. I fully acknowledge that. However, I don't think that the existence of something in nature can justify human-caused injustices, which is what animal agriculture is. And I believe that because humans have the capability of moral reasoning and compassion for others, which we can use to supplement our instincts. The other thing to note is that animals like tigers and lions are obligate carnivores, which means that their nutritional needs require them to kill and eat other animals. For humans, that's not actually the case. We actually have a choice of whether to eat a vegan diet or a diet with animal products. So in that sense, it's really just as natural for us humans to eat a vegan diet as it is for us to eat an animal-based diet. Argument 2, animals are humanely treated, so it's okay. So unfortunately, this argument is based on a completely false perception of reality. And in truth, what's happening is that in animal agriculture, animals are suffering a great deal. I'll leave it at that for now, but later in this video I'll go into some of the details. In the past, however, I believe this to be true, partly because of my cognitive dissonance, but also partly because of the marketing efforts of the animal agriculture industry. They, of course, want to propagate the myth that animal agriculture is humane, and to that end they create labels such as humane certified, cage-free, and grass-fed. But unfortunately, I believe that these labels are usually just a tool of the industry to mislead the public into thinking that they're more humane than they actually are. As a side note, I have always had a discomfort with the phrase humane slaughter, and now it's clear why. It's because this phrase is really a contradiction in terms. If you're treating an animal humanely, and you have the option to slaughter it, and also you have the option not to slaughter it, it's never the humane option to slaughter it, particularly when the end goal is to satisfy human desires with no regard for the desires of the animal. Argument 3, eating animals is healthy. Okay, so health is a subject that I am definitely not qualified to be an authority on. Normally, I would rely on experts for this sort of topic, but unfortunately, in this case, different experts gave me different opinions on whether a vegan diet is healthy or not. But I was still able to get around this by considering what I would do in every possible scenario. So, first of all, what if the vegan diet is healthier or it is equally healthy as my current diet? Well, in that case, great. It's a win-win scenario for me to switch. But if it had a mild negative impact on my health, I probably would still feel like just dealing with those effects while on the vegan diet, because that's still preferable than causing so much violence. Only if the vegan diet severely hurt my health would I go back to eating animals. But in any case, I still felt obligated to at least try it and see how it went. I figured it would probably be okay because when I asked my own doctor about it, he told me that I could just take vitamin B12 and I would be perfectly fine. Now that it has been a year since then, I can confirm that, in fact, I did not experience any negative effects from switching to a vegan diet. So it turned out that there was no conflict between my compassion for animals and my own health. I'll elaborate on the health effects of the vegan diet later in the video. Argument 4. Eating animals should be respected as a personal choice. So my thoughts on this argument have actually evolved over the past year. When I was initially viewing the videos as a non-vegan, they pretty much addressed this argument by saying that eating animals shouldn't be respected as a personal choice because this choice has victims, namely the animals. Meanwhile, the vegan diet does not have victims. My initial response to this, watching as a non-vegan, was, oh wait, I guess they're kind of right. My choice for a non-vegan diet isn't actually respectable. And I think I did need to think this way for a little bit, at least so that I would be ready to change my diet to a vegan diet. But now, thinking back 1 year later, my view on this is a little bit more complicated. Because now I recognize more fully that I can't really apply my own moral views to other people's lives, and also other people can make their decisions based on their own moral views, their cultures, and their experiences. Admittedly, this is kind of a contradiction because on one hand, I'm trying to say that I oppose violence, but on the other hand, the thing that I recognize as violent is something that I'm respecting in other people's choices. So, yeah, this is a tough spot to be in, and I don't really know how to resolve this. Argument 5. Access to vegan food is unequal. It's definitely true that privilege exists, and some people are more privileged than others to be able to follow a vegan diet. And for those who unfortunately have less privilege, restricting their diet to be completely vegan can be anywhere from less of a real choice to not even a real choice. So it's inappropriate to blame them for not choosing it. So when I say that it's immoral to eat animal products, I'm mostly saying that when there is a real choice between a vegan diet and a not vegan diet. Specifically in my case, I can confirm that I had enough privilege to either follow a diet that contained animal products or a diet that didn't. And I can totally understand if someone doesn't believe in veganism for this reason. And if that's you watching this, I'm curious to see if you would support policies that would ensure that even the less privileged have access to healthy vegan food. So yeah, these were all the thoughts that I was considering when I was learning about veganism. And after considering everything, I did decide that it was the right thing to do for the animals to switch to the vegan diet, and that it would be the wrong thing to do for the animals to continue eating them. Another important factor in my decision to become a vegan was learning a bunch of facts about the animal agriculture industry. And I will admit that I haven't really fact-checked these in the last year, but you can think of these as the view of the world that made me want to become a vegan. And if you want to fact-check them yourself, be warned that you might encounter some very distressing images. Okay, so first of all, a huge percentage, like virtually all animal products, come from factory farms. And on factory farms, animal welfare is pretty much completely ignored, and the only thing that they care about is profit. And to this end, they're willing to inflict a huge amount of cruelty. Like, This is a larger amount of cruelty than I could have possibly imagined. But first, let's talk about how many animals are going through this system. It's estimated that 70 billion animals are killed every year for the sake of making food. And that's 7 with 10 zeros after it, which is a mind-boggling number. If we want to say that every human is equally at fault for each of these 70 billion animals being killed, split that across 8 billion humans, and you still have 8.75 deaths per year per person. And if I heard that someone was being very cruel to and killing more than 8 animals per year, I probably wouldn't think too highly of them. But then, considering this as a non-vegan myself, I was forced to reckon with the fact that I myself was causing more than 8 animal deaths per year due to my very optional choices. But that's assuming that my contribution is average. Well, is it? I actually think that it might have been well over average. Because I had to recognize that I did have a lot of privilege, if I wanted animal products in my meals, I could have animal products in my meals every time. And not only could I, but I did. By some estimates that I saw on the internet, I was responsible for up to 200 or even 300 animal deaths per year just by eating animal products all the time. I sure did not want to be the perpetrator of all of this death. So now I'm going to address what I've been avoiding talking about for this whole video, which is what specifically is so cruel about farming animals. Now, this is the part of the video that is going to go into the details of specific cruel practices. So if you do want to skip this, you can go ahead and use this timestamp. Now, there's just so much cruelty going on in factory farms that what I'm about to talk about is really just a sample. So let me get started with meat. Starting with the obvious, animals farmed for meat are eventually slaughtered violently. They are forced to be born for humans, and they are forced to die for humans. And between their birth and death, there is still plenty of cruelty to go around. On a typical farm, animals are forced to live in extremely confined spaces. And when I say extremely confined, I'm talking like chickens get basically just a piece of paper to live in for their entire life. And pigs farmed for meat are forced to live in a crate that's not even wide enough for them to turn around. And since they're in these confined spaces for their whole lives, they never once get to see the light of day. And on a related note, this also causes diseases to spread very quickly and very commonly in factory farms. Now, what do these farms do when animals have diseases? Well, unfortunately, their decisions are motivated not by compassion, but by profits. So they'd usually pick whichever option is cheaper between just killing the animal immediately or simply allowing it to suffer with its disease. As for actually treating them, that's usually never considered as an option because it would have a low return on investment. Another common practice on factory farms is cutting off the body parts of animals. And this includes the beaks of chickens, the tails of pigs, and the horns of cattle. Now, they say that things like debeaking chickens is done for the sake of preventing them from pecking at each other, but that really does not make sense to me because you can't solve animal suffering by inflicting more animal suffering yourself. Really, the only explanation is that it provides some relatively mild benefit to humans, like farmer convenience or extra profits for the farm. I mentioned these in the context of farming meat, but they're also very common in the context of farming other animal products. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some of the cruelty that is specific to dairy farming. And as a reminder, dairy is basically milk and the products that we make from it, like butter, cheese, and yogurt. First, let me actually clear up some basic facts about cows that I actually didn't really know before I was vegan. The term cattle refers to the species, and cows are female cattle and bulls are male cattle. And since cattle are mammals, the females of the species, cows, produce milk for their newborn babies right after they have had a pregnancy. So do farms just wait around for dairy cows to get pregnant before they take their milk? The answer is, unfortunately, a no. It's a very common practice in the dairy industries to artificially inseminate cows. And in practice, what that means is filling a syringe with bull semen and forcibly inserting it into the uterus via the vagina just to force them to get pregnant. Farms do this as frequently as possible, which usually ends up being every year, just to get as much milk as they can out of their bodies. And what of the baby cattle, also known as calves, that are born to these cows? The way the dairy industry sees it, some of them will grow up to be cows themselves, so they can exploit them further, but some of them would grow up to be bulls, so they would find it more profitable to simply sell the calves to a slaughterhouse for the sake of making veal. And veal, by the way, is the meat of baby cattle. Another thing about dairy cows is that they are selectively bred by humans to produce far more milk than they would in the wild. And the bodies that humans have designed for them through selective breeding are unfortunately not very suited for their own well-being. The cows have to suffer from various health problems just because their bodies are designed to produce as much milk as they are. As the dairy cow goes through these years of repeated forced pregnancies, its milk production will wane, and eventually there will be a point where it's no longer profitable. This usually happens after 5 years, which is well before a cow's natural lifespan of 25 years. But it is at this point that the dairy cow is sent to a slaughterhouse to become meat. So they all end up getting killed anyways. Now let's talk about what goes on in the egg industry. There are a lot of parallels between the egg industry and the dairy industry, such as how selective breeding is involved to make chickens lay way more eggs than they would in the wild. Also, hens are female chickens, and only hens lay eggs, so male chicks are considered useless to the industry. They, like male cattle, are also killed at birth, but in this case they're not even considered profitable enough to be meat, because chickens used for meat are from a breed known as broiler chickens, which are bred to grow to full size as quickly as possible. But the male chicks born to egg-laying hens are not useful as meat for that reason, and also not useful to lay eggs. So as soon as they hatch and the farm determines that they are male, they're placed on a conveyor belt that drops them into a grinder and they just get ground alive. And these farmed hens often experience the same cruel practices that affect animals raised for meat, such as being confined in tiny spaces. Sometimes eggs will be labeled cage-free, but that's really just a way for the industry to get away with being cruel to chickens in other ways while pretending like they're not cruel. Like, if the eggs were cage-free, then the chickens that laid them might have still been packed very tightly on the floor, which is not really much better than being put in a cage. So that's a sample of the types of animal cruelty that goes on in the animal agriculture industry. And if you made it through all of that, congrats. I know it can be hard to listen to all of that stuff. And if you just skipped straight here from the timestamp, no worries. I'm going to go back to describing animal cruelty only in general terms without specifics. So let's pick up my personal story where I had left it off. As I mentioned before, on November 10th, I watched my first couple of YouTube videos about veganism. These videos got me to self-reflect on my values regarding animal cruelty, take veganism seriously as a philosophy, and start educating myself on the reality of the animal agriculture industry, as I've so far outlined in this video. And thinking about all these things really kind of hit me like a brick, because I kind of thought of myself as more or less a good person, but this kind of threw a wrench in all of that. So the very next day, on November 11th, I decided that I would try going vegan for just a day, just to see how feasible it is. Sadly, I didn't even make it to the afternoon because my friends had offered me some donuts, and those donuts were made with dairy and eggs, and I just could not resist them. So initially, this quick failure kind of made me want to just dismiss veganism as an infeasible lifestyle change. Yet, for the next several days, I did watch a few more videos, and also every time that I chose animal products, I couldn't stop thinking about the amount of animal suffering that I was causing with each choice. One time I went to a Thai restaurant where I usually order the red curry with chicken, but this feeling stopped me from doing that time, and I got the red curry with tofu instead, which was totally feasible because it was just a simple substitution. And it turned out that I liked it pretty much the same amount that I would have if it was chicken. Another time I was thinking about getting a cheese-based snack at work, but then I thought, oh, it's still totally feasible to just not get the snack, or to get one of the many vegan snacks that were also available. So I did that. So on November 17th, I decided I'd try again to go vegan, but I would do it a little bit more gradually. I did already have some milk and some cookies that were made with dairy and eggs at home, and if I didn't eat them, they would just go bad. So I decided from that day on, I was not going to buy any animal products, but if I felt like having them, I would have the ones that I already had bought. And once those ran out, I wouldn't buy anymore. And this time, the people that I was living with were traveling for the holidays, so there was less risk of social pressure. So after a few days of doing this, I actually realized that I didn't even really like the milk all that much anymore. And I was really only drinking it to prevent it from going to waste, along with, by extension, the animal cruelty that was inflicted to create it. By November 24th, which was actually Thanksgiving of last year, I'd actually run out of cookies and milk. And after that, even to my surprise, I never looked back at eating animal products. So this date marks the anniversary of when I went vegan by philosophy and diet. So now that it's been 1 year, how has veganism affected my life? I'll start with how it affected my health. So personally, I didn't really feel much of a difference in my health that could be attributed to the vegan diet. I will say that the past year has been one of the happiest of my life, but I think I can pretty safely attribute that to other reasons. But I think that I'm really just bad at noticing changes to my health. I do remember one time when I worked out with a personal trainer for like a year, and I definitely got stronger, but I didn't really feel stronger or healthier. Even other people in my life could just look at me and tell that I'm stronger. I guess I'm just bad at maintaining a sense of my own health. I do suspect that I did get healthier from switching to a vegan diet, but I don't feel healthier for whatever reason. I found that there was nothing really that I needed to change about my health habits, other than taking this vitamin B12 supplement every day as my doctor recommended that I do. I'm not like counting my protein or anything like that. I found that whatever eating habits that I naturally have are good enough to supply my nutrients, even on a vegan diet. I do still eat a bunch of unhealthy food, such as processed foods, sugar, unhealthy fats, etc. But improving my diet is still a future project for me. As for now, I felt fairly healthy before I went vegan, and I still feel fairly healthy. So, how did switching to a vegan diet affect my ability to find food that I like? Personally, I'm someone who goes out to eat at restaurants a lot, and I cook every now and then. In my area, I found that there were actually several fully vegan restaurants that I pretty much just ignored before I was vegan. And also, I found vegan options at other restaurants. There was a bit of an upfront effort cost to going vegan where I had to figure out what restaurants had vegan options or were fully vegan. But once I did that, it was pretty easy from then on. I now have a pretty regular set of restaurants that I rotate between. And I know that there are other restaurants that people have recommended me that I could try, but I'm pretty satisfied with the set of restaurants that I have already. In terms of cooking, of course, it would be even easier to cook vegan for yourself. I usually cook using Indian recipes that my family taught me, and I found that most of them were already vegan, and if they weren't, it was very easy to adapt them to become vegan. As an example, it's common to serve rice and vegetable curries with yogurt, but if I just switch out the dairy yogurt for a plant-based yogurt, it worked just fine. Going vegan ended up being actually way easier than I thought it would be. In the past, when I thought of vegan food, I usually thought of like vegan burgers or vegan cheese or vegan, like things that are usually animal products, but they're being imitated by vegan food. This is the type of food that kind of has a reputation for being expensive, though even now they've gotten a lot cheaper. But even otherwise, vegan food doesn't necessarily have to be an imitation of non-vegan food, and it doesn't have to be expensive. This should have been pretty obvious in retrospect, but things like fruits, vegetables, nuts, they're not vegan imitations of any non-vegan product, but they're still vegan. And it's these type of foods that tend to be less expensive than non-vegan food. I think overall, my food expenses have actually gone down since I became a vegan. And that's extra impressive considering how much inflation there was between November 22 and now. In terms of taste, I found that the tasty food is actually mostly from plants. Going back to the Thai red curry example from earlier, the reason that I like red curry is because of the curry. It's not because of the chicken in it or the pork in it or the whatever stuff in it. If you replace that stuff with a vegan alternative like tofu or just vegetables, it'll still taste just as good because the flavor is in the sauce, and the sauce is made out of plants. The one taste that I'm arguably still missing is the taste of cheese. But whenever I think that, I just remember that there are the vegan cheese imitations, and I think the taste of those is also pretty good. Now, how did veganism affect my social life? Now, this is the aspect of my life that actually experienced a negative effect from me going vegan. As I mentioned before, pretty much all my friends and family before I went vegan were also not vegan. But now I'm in a position where I see eating animals as immoral, but my friends and family don't. And so they continue to eat animals. Normally, when I think someone in my life is doing something that is wrong, I'd hope to resolve it with a mature, open-minded discussion. So I did initiate these discussions with various friends and family, but very quickly I found that several of them didn't really want me to talk about it at all, and some going so far as to say or imply that it's wrong of me to be talking about this. Now, having made such a big change to my life for the sake of morality, I don't take accusations like this lightly. So I decided to err on the side of being silent most of the time. And me being silent is great for my friends, but it is really hard on me. Even though in the past year I resolved not to buy any animal products, meanwhile my friends and family were buying animal products, and their choices collectively probably led to the deaths of hundreds or even thousands of animals. So every year of me being silent on this issue, I'm pretty much passively allowing this to happen. But on the other hand, if I do speak up, it's kind of a disrespect to my friends and family's personal choices, so I don't really want to do that either. Occasionally I'll see or hear people in my life enjoying animal products and saying things like, "Oh, bacon is delicious," or "I recommend this chicken dish." Before I was aware of veganism, these sounded like very innocent phrases. But now they seem to me more like glorifications of violence against animals. Even so, I decided that I would not speak up in the moment when these things happen, and staying silent at these times is kind of painful for me. I am still interested in maintaining my friendships with non-vegans, and to that end, I'm mostly willing to bear the burden of this conflict on my own by being silent about it. A big motivation for me to want to make this video was to express my feelings on this without feeling like I'm disrespecting people's choices. But within the last year, I did actually make new friends from the local vegan community, so that's great. How did veganism affect my interests? Back in high school and college, I was more interested in learning about philosophy and justice issues. But when I graduated and I, had to start learning to be an adult and all of that interest kind of took a backseat. But now it's been years since then, and I'm a lot more comfortable in my life. And learning about veganism has been a bit of a wake-up call for me to think about the moral implications of my actions or risk passively perpetuating something terrible like animal cruelty. And it shouldn't really need to be said, but I do also care about injustices that affect humans, in addition to caring about injustices against non-human animals. So in the past year, I've been using some of my free time to teach myself using the internet about various other issues that are going on in the world, such as environmental damage, oppression of women and marginalized races and ethnicities, and economic inequality. And it turns out there is a fair amount of intersectionality between veganism and some of these issues. For example, the animal agriculture industry often employs slaughterhouse workers that come from marginalized populations and only take these jobs because of economic desperation. On the job, they're constantly exposed to violence, and this often severely hurts their mental health. So yeah, I've been learning about all of these issues and considering whether there's anything that I could do or change about my life to fight them. And that's it. That's pretty much all that I wanted to share about myself. This video ended up being quite a bit longer than I thought it would be, so if you're still here, I want to thank you so much for listening to my story. Now, there's a chance that after listening to all this, you might be interested in making a change to your own life. So I'd like to present a few options for you, and you can decide for yourself, of course, which ones, if any, would be appropriate for your life. Firstly, and most obviously, you can go vegan, just like I did. I'd say this is probably the most effective way to make an impact for how much effort it requires. Alternatively, you can go vegetarian. Just cutting out meat from your diet still has a pretty large impact. Thirdly, if there's no way that you can go vegetarian or vegan entirely, you could still potentially let go of the idea that you need animal products in every meal that you eat. Remember that as an omnivore, you can still eat vegetarian and vegan things. So, for example, if you go to a restaurant that has a vegetarian or vegan section, give it a look. It might still have something you like, even though you're not vegetarian or vegan. And fourth, another change you can make to your life as an omnivore is to change the way that you think and talk about animal products. You might think of animal products as a necessity in your life, and in that case, consider not treating it as a treat or a luxury or something to celebrate. You could choose to see it instead as a moral compromise that is required for your own comfort. This could also take the form of not recommending non vegan things to other people on the basis of their taste, and in general, refraining from glorifying the taste of animal products. So, yeah, these are all, of course, just options. You can choose to do any of them, none of them. It's completely up to you. Again, thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope you have a great day.